we can say definitively that religions are all bullshit.
Welcome to Brainstorm.
We have the explicit tag for a reason.
This is a base level argument to a higher level morality.
I get paid to science?
To science as much as one can science.
What the hell was my point?
Trigger warning. The Brainstorm podcast will criticize your most cherished beliefs. We attack nonsense in all its forms and discuss difficult subjects. If you peddle pseudoscience, supernatural woo, or religious dogma, then this is not your safe place. This is the home of hardcore skepticism.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this extra episode of the Brainstorm podcast Skeptic Studio, where we do interviews, major topics, and news related to skepticism and atheism. This is a special episode because there was a bit of a deadline for getting this interview done and out. Starting on October 12th and ending on October 15th, the Regina Public Library is screening a film called Losing Our Religion, a feature-length documentary about preachers who are not believers and what atheists do when they miss church. I spent about 30 minutes talking to Leslea Mair about the film and discussing being an atheist while needing a community. I want to apologize for the sound quality. I got it as good as I could, but there was something going on with the connection or my interface or something that made Leslie's side of the conversation sound a bit weird. I hope that the weird sound isn't too distracting and that you enjoyed the interview. So here it is, my interview with Leslea Mair. Your name is Leslea Mair? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's how you pronounce that?
Yeah, Leslea Mair.
And the name of your film, which we're discussing, is Losing Our Religion?
Yes, it is.
And can you give me a bit of, I guess, why don't we start with a bit of your background? Like, how did you come to atheism or secularism?
I'm pretty much a lifelong non-believer. Before I actually referred to myself as an atheist, I really have been a lifelong agnostic. It's just not been something that was terribly important. I was raised in the United Church, so it's a very liberal church. It was a very liberal congregation, so it was a pretty short walk from one to the other, and really it kind of, a lot of the supernatural stuff really wasn't that important to us. It was more the sense of community, great music, beautiful words, poetry, all kinds of beautiful stuff, great stained glass and the beautiful windows. So I always had a really positive view of church and a good community of people who really cared for each other. So it was always really, didn't really believe in God. Stopped going to church after I hit my university years, but not necessarily hostile to the idea of church per se, just not really invested in religion. So this is a long time ago, of course, and much more recently. I make science documentaries, so a lot of the time I read science blogs, and a lot of science blogs are also written by people who are active in the atheist community.
Right.
So, and the secular community. So reading those kind of led to some of the other blogs, and I heard about Dan Dennett and Linda Lascola's initial study on preachers who weren't believers. Now, if you make documentaries, you're always thinking about what's a good story. Oh, I heard about this. Would that make a good story? I don't know. Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. You think in those terms. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool.
Right.
But I didn't think there was a whole story there yet. And then a few years later, they came out with a follow-up study and the formation of the Clergy Project. And I thought, okay, now there's something there. And at the time, I had just finished a production and I was kind of looking for another production and started thinking about it and contacted them and said, I'm a Canadian documentary filmmaker. I work in television, and I'm really interested in talking to you about the possibility of doing a documentary on this. And so they really checked me out to make sure I was on the up and up.
Right.
And I was who I said I was, and I wasn't just there to troll and make trouble. They're very cautious. And I guess I passed all the tests because they gave me access.
Right.
So,
No, right
yeah.
on. So what is you kind of mentioned clergy and the clergy project. What is the main thrust of the film?
Well, the main thrust of the film is about what do preachers who are not believers, what do they do? When they come to a place where they don't buy into the narrative anymore and they don't believe in the supernatural, what do they do? Because they have all of their education, all of their work experience for a lot of them, because many of them get involved with church and church stuff very early on in their lives. If that's not just your job and your education, but it's also your community and your family's tied into it, what do you do?
Right.
And to just throw up your hands and say, listen, guys, I changed my mind, I'm going to walk away now. You stand to lose not just your livelihood, but you stand to lose, all of your personal connections as well. And that's incredibly difficult for people to do.
For sure.
So a lot of them just kind of keep quiet and just try and continue on in those roles. Or they don't have a choice to because they have financial responsibilities to their families, and they can't just not have a job for a while. It's just, none of us can really afford to be unemployed, right?
Yeah.
So that's one part. And then the next part that talking to the preachers who are not believers kind of led me to was the creation of secular communities. And there are a lot of communities that are springing up they resemble church in a lot of the positive ways the church exists, like, a community of people who care about each other and look after each other and get together and, inspire each other and all of that sort of thing. But a lot of them are happening now without the religion.
Right.
And I was fascinated by that.
Well, it's something that we talk about a lot in the atheist community, is that we need more positive community aspects. Like, we're always talking about how to do outreach and how to draw people who might be non-believers into our communities.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people are people. We all need to feel, like we're a part of a community. We all like to be, we're a communal species is what we do. So, yeah. And, this is a way of doing it. The secular community is so active online. There's so many connections, now that, the internet is such a ubiquitous thing in our world. But meeting face to face, that's something a lot harder to do and a lot harder to organize. So.
Yeah, for sure. Is your film kind of a story, or is it a series of interviews, or what type of? I guess it's kind of a documentary, right?
Well, it is a documentary. It's a feature-length documentary, and we follow two of our characters, Brendan and Jen, through their experience, where Brendan is an evangelical pastor who loses his faith, or in some ways comes to rationalism. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Sometimes it doesn't feel as much like a loss for some people. But Jen is still a believer. And so it's what happened to them as they went through the process of not just coming to a place of non-belief and trying to find a way out, but also dealing with the rejection of community and a close friend who actually outed them to the rest of the community.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and what happens to a lot of clergy project guys is that there's so much stress in leaving the church that their marriages often don't survive.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really, really hard on the families. And so this is Brendan and Jen's experience going through that. So that weaves through the entire show. But we also talked to Daniel Dennett,
Nice.
Dan Barker from the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Yeah.
We have a short interview with Richard Dawkins, so he pops up in a couple places, and a few other Clergy Project members, some of whom are still closeted atheists in the pulpit, and others who are more open. And we do actually have two ministers who are out atheists in the pulpit, which is really interesting how they've managed to work things for themselves and for their congregations.
Right. We on Brainstorm, we interviewed Greta Vosper.
Yes, Greta's one of our people.
Okay.
We have a little bit about what's going on with Greta, or what went on with Greta. She's a very interesting lady.
Yeah, for sure. I watched her case pretty closely with the United Church, and I kind of I'm never really sure, like, do I think she should have stayed with the church, or should they have let her stay there? Or, I mean, if she's not preaching about what their religion is, then maybe they made the right call. I've always kind of been unsure about what to think about that.
Yeah, well, and one of I've talked to other Clergy Project members who have been involved with the United Church, and there is in some cases, even people who are on the secular side are saying, like, no, she shouldn't be doing that. It's a church, and a church, what's a church if you're not doing the God thing?
Right.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. On the other hand, the United Church has such a long history of social activism and social service,
right,
and such a flexible idea of what believing in God is about, that I don't disagree with Greta either. I mean, it's a really difficult kind of way of looking at it, because I grew up in the same church she did, in the same kind of, not the same church community, but the same denomination, and to me, it just doesn't sound like it's that far out of the realm of what was happening while I was growing up there.
Right.
So, it's like, well, why not? And it may actually be the ticket to survival for a lot of these mainline Protestant churches, because they're dying out.
Yeah, I could see that if they just let a little more secularism in, let a little bit less of the mythology, I guess they could still survive into the 21st century a bit longer.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what West Hill is doing. And it's not just Greta's work, but West Hill, the congregation, is working really hard at saying, well, how can we be an inclusive community where even you can feel comfortable here, whether you're a believer or not? Can we find a way to come together and put a little bit more love and goodness into the world and not leave anybody out? And I think that's fantastic. I don't know if they'll achieve it, but
it's a good
so
goal.
far they're doing pretty well.
It sounds a lot like the Universal Unitarians.
Yeah, kind of. Although I think they see themselves as just a little bit different.
Yeah,
than that.
I'm sure they do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we also talked to John Shuck, he's a fellow who is in the Presbyterian Church in Portland, Oregon area.
Okay.
And, they still use at West Hill, they've stopped using the religious language. In John's church, they still use it, but it's to ask the bigger questions, and it's all very much a metaphorical, more symbolic thing than it is an actual literal thing. And you find a really wide range of Clergy Project members. You've got people who started out hardcore fundamentalists to people who are, in the most liberal denominations where, everything is really kind of up for interpretation.
Right.
So it's a huge range. And there's other religions in there too. There's Islam is represented, Judaism, Hinduism, all of the major religions around the globe are part of the Clergy Project community.
Yeah. It seems like a very worthwhile project from my perspective. Like, there's got to be a lot of disillusionment I guess from my perspective, people we've interviewed quite often end up being like, they learned more about their faith and they were trying to reaffirm it, and they eventually left it because they couldn't see past that, I guess, the myth of it.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people have said things like, well, the biggest, boost to my atheism is reading the Bible.
Right. Yeah.
Or studying the Bible. They actually have a position in some seminaries where someone is in charge of dealing with the trauma of teaching believing seminary students that the Bible, historically, how that went together, and because it flies in the face of, it's not, you received the word of God on high and we wrote it down and it's exactly the way it was. It was like, no, this fragment is this old and then there's this fragment. These two things oppose each other. And,
right.
It's, as a document, it's a bit of a kludge, right? Just put together over time.
Yeah, for sure.
So finding the human origins of it, for one of our contributors, Catherine Dunphy, was something that was, she just looked at it and went, this is not from God. This is from Bronze Age man.
Right.
And she had been looking at becoming a nun and instead wound up being one of the founding members of the Clergy Project.
Right. Yeah.
So it's learning about that. For some people, it's learning more about science and saying that flies in the face of what I've been taught or what I've been saying to people out of my pulpit. Some of them go through a really long process where they kind of go, well, I'm in a fairly strict denomination, but I'm just going to shift to the slightly less strict denomination. Maybe I'll move to the even more liberal denomination until they finally get to the place where they say, you know what, this is just not making sense.
Yeah, that's right. I guess it's a broad community, right? There's lots of different stories for why people are atheists and lots of other stories for why they might be activist about it. And
oh yeah, and I mean, we talk with Bart Campolo, who talks about coming to the conclusion his father is a very prominent evangelical speaker and teacher
right.
and minister, and he'd been in ministry himself for decades, and finally kind of came to the conclusion that I think this is it, and he's become a humanist chaplain. So he's still a minister. And this is the really cool thing about these people is that, right, it takes a special person to go into ministry. It's a hard job. It doesn't pay extremely well, but it pays okay. But you're dealing with people in crisis and you're managing a community. There's a lot of hours. They're unusual hours often. Yeah. It's a tough job. People get into it because they care about people. When they lose their faith, they still care deeply about the people around them. And they're still really helpers. They want to go out and help people.
Right.
And I think developing secular communities is a way that some of them have found it. I can still be a minister. I just don't have to do the God thing.
Yeah, it's nice that they have that option to still, I guess in some ways where they can still quote unquote minister to people or counsel people or help them and or just see communities blossom and things like that. One of our contributors is Mike House, who was one of the founders of Houston Oasis. The Oasis communities are all over the place now. We've got one in Kansas City, we've got a couple more in the States, greater Boston area, and Toronto. And Greta Vosper was instrumental in getting a Toronto Oasis community started up. Nice.
We also talked to the Sunday Assembly people, which are out of Britain, who are really, really fun. They have a Sunday morning rave.
Neat. Great.
They got a band, they got lights, they sing pop songs, they have funny stories or inspiring stories, and people are dancing in the aisles, and it's so much fun. But it's all about, let's celebrate life. Let's celebrate the now.
Yeah, that's very cool. I guess, how did you get you said you had some contributors. Was this a Kickstarter program that got you going, or?
Oh, no. Well, that's a kind of a language quirk I have. No, actually, we funded this through. First of all, we got a broadcast license from Documentary Channel.
Oh, wow.
So the commissioning editor, Bruce Cowley at Documentary Channel, and I know each other. I've pitched him on many different occasions, and I pitched him this project, and he liked it enough that he came in with that, and then we funded it through Canada Media Fund, tax credits, and some equity from Manitoba Film and Music, our provincial agency here. So we fully funded the program. We put a little bit in ourselves because we needed to fill a gap.
Right.
But when I say contributor, I'm talking about a lot of North Americans. When they make a film, they talk about the people who are in their film. They call them the subjects.
Right.
And it sounds kind of cold and clinical to me. And I didn't realize it until I was at a documentary conference in Britain some years ago. And the British producer who was doing a panel discussion kept referring to his contributors. And I realized that, oh, wow, that's so much more respectful way to talk about the people who are in your film, because they're giving you a gift.
Right.
They're giving you their time. They're sharing their knowledge with you. They're sharing their experiences, their emotions with you. We couldn't do this without these people. So they are very much contributing to my film. Not financially, but with everything else that's really important in it. So I call them contributors.
Yeah. That's actually a really neat way to word it. Like it turns them less into an object or a thing, and brings that human kind of element out of it.
Yeah, it really does. It's like, this is not an experiment on you. We're sharing here, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, especially with a project like this one, where you are asking people to share deep, dark secrets. One of our closeted atheists, when he sat down in a room with our crew, he more than doubled the number of people who knew his secret that day.
Wow.
His wife knew, he had a friend who knew, and his daughter, and that was it. Wow. Nobody else had any idea.
That would be pretty daunting, you'd think, to be in that position.
Well, and incredibly brave of him to come and meet with us. We had to kind of clandestinely get a hotel room and then escort him up to the hotel room, and it's a very cloak and dagger.
Right. Yeah.
We did that with a couple of different people. With Brendan and Jen, they were still, anonymous when we started the process, and we actually had to arrange a site where we wouldn't bump into anyone, or no one would ask any questions, so that we had to protect privacy. That was one of the things that the Clergy Project insisted on. In fact, Linda Lascola made me promise I would not ask anyone to out themselves on camera, and that I would respect people's privacy. And so that was part of the agreement, that I was allowed access.
Right.
And yeah, so it was really important to make sure that nobody was risking, losing their job precipitously, or just something bad happening, or, that, because my film is important to me, but, this is their lives.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, it's, I guess it's tough, because on one hand, you want them to be protected, but it would be, it would say a lot to people watching if they were to out themselves on film, but you can't really ask somebody to do that. I guess it's too invasive almost.
Yeah. Well, and it depends on, are you going for the shot or are you going for the long game? And right. I think that really we were committed more to the long game. And, CNN had interviewed anonymous members of the Clergy Project and done just that. Hey, can you get up in front of your congregation this Sunday while we shoot it and tell them?
Right.
And, it would have just destroyed that person's life. But, we didn't want to do that. And actually, in the end, Brendan and Jen, agreed that we should use all of the footage that we'd taken when it was at a point where, okay, it's come out and we're we're dealing with the fallout from it, sure, you can use the footage, you can show us on camera. So we were very, very fortunate that we were able to do that. I think it's a much more dramatic story. And they're so great on camera. They're lovely people. So, yeah, it's really important to us.
How did you meet the people that your contributors, or like how did you? I guess you said you went through the clergy project for them, but to pick two people or one person whose story you kind of could tell, how did you come to that? How was the process for that?
Well, I worked pretty closely with Linda Lascola and Catherine Dunphy, and I told them that this is what I was looking for. I'm looking for someone who's in the process of, or still in the pulpit. And so they took what we were looking for. They had me draft up a little blurb about it, and they put it onto the Clergy Project website, message board, and allowed people to contact me. Or they went through Linda to contact me, and then we would have a conversation over the phone. And, you know, I talked to a few different people, and some of them were in the right space for it, and some of them weren't. And then from there, we decided, you know, is it possible for us to come down? What kind of timing we could do for that? And, you know, what safeguards could we put in place to make sure that we didn't have, you know, a harmful impact on them? So I mean, it was really just kind of a blind research project, really. I kind of put it out there and hoped that somebody would come talk to me. And I did talk to some other people. You know, there was, we also talked to Ryan Bell, but he'd already done his year of atheism. So Ryan was already kind of on a different path, and that wasn't quite right for what we were doing. Although he's super guy, you know. Really great.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so we talked to a bunch of different people and just kind of narrowed down to the stories that we thought were really compelling.
That's interesting. So I guess, excuse me, have you, what kind of response are you getting from this? And I know it's showing here in Regina in the public library for a few days. Do you have similar events happening all across Canada?
Well, we do. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, we did a world premiere at the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival in Newburyport, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. Yeah. And that was great because Dan Dennett lives in Boston and was able to come and join us for the screening. This past weekend, we opened in Winnipeg at the Cinematheque here. So we had 4 public screenings. This coming week, we are going to be at the Carlton Theatre in Toronto for a week. So we got a whole week for people to come and see the film. We've only had a few screenings so far, and of course we're in Regina starting on Thursday, October 12th. So the end of, you know, coming up very soon. And then it's airing on Documentary Channel on October 15th.
Okay.
So, but even with just the few screenings we've had, I'm already getting emails from people who say, hey, I'm a former minister and thank you for making the film. I'm glad to see this. I'm glad to see awareness of this.
That's great.
Yeah. You know, where we haven't had the audiences where I've done filmmaker Q&As, and myself and my co-director, Leif Calder, have been there. We've gotten some great feedback from people, very positive. The question that always comes up, though, or often comes up is, but they're spiritual but not religious, right? It's like, no, no, they're not.
That's not what atheist means.
That's not what atheist means. It's like, well, they still believe in souls, right? No, they don't. Yeah, that's kind of one of the things about the Clergy Project is that they're actual, you know, atheists.
Yeah.
I guess you could say we're all agnostics. It's just a matter of degree, right? Because nobody knows anything for sure. So we're getting some good feedback. We're really, I expect that after we start showing in Toronto and certainly after the air date, we're going to get a lot more feedback. That's usually the way it goes.
Right.
But I'm quite interested to see how the wider reception goes.
Yeah, that's, yeah. I actually, when I saw this, and I got a message from a mutual friend who informed me about this. I hadn't even heard of it. And it's I guess, kind of exciting, I guess, to see that this film that speaks directly to the community that I'm a part of is playing in the city that I live in.
Absolutely. And, we're doing a lot of community screenings as well. Our distributor has kind of a package deal set up where you can, it's the cost of it's geared to however many people are in your group. You can get the Blu-ray to play and posters and things like that. And you can even do it as a fundraiser if you want to charge admission or whatever. And we've already got some community screenings lined up, one in Hollywood, which I'm so excited about, and another one in another part of LA and Denver. So, and this is just in the first couple of weeks of being out there. So I think we're going to see a lot more screenings cropping up, especially in the U.S. We'd really like to have one happen in Vancouver, get out to the farther west of the country here.
For sure.
And yeah, so I'm hoping that some communities around Canada are also going to jump in and say, yeah, I want to show this film to my people, to my community.
Do you have like a website or somewhere where people can find out more information about it?
Oh, we absolutely do. We are at Losing Our Religion, all one word, no spaces, .ca. And we also have Losing Our Religion movie on Facebook and Twitter. So we've been quite active on social media, trying to kind of get audience, and kind of get the word out there. So that's been good. We're also, we have a newsletter that if somebody wants to subscribe to the newsletter, we'll put you on our MailChimp list and let you know what's happening with us. So, yeah, we're really trying to do as much outreach as we possibly can.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all the questions I have for you. Is there anything that you might want to mention that I have missed?
I think really if you wanted to boil the film down to the one major theme, the major theme for this film is people are more important than beliefs. That we all need community. We all need to come together and, that we should be able to do that in a way that is positive and good. And, church people don't have the corner on goodness,
Right.
I think there's a lot of good stuff and good people in the secular communities. So I'm just so happy to have the opportunity to celebrate that.
That's perfect. Right on.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, and especially on such short notice. I appreciate it.
That was my interview with Leslea Mair. I'm going to do the outro, but before I do, I want to let you know about our new conference project. Angela, the planning team, and I have started a GoFundMe with the goal of $5,000. This money will essentially pay for everything necessary for the conference. Donations will go towards the purchase of your ticket, and they'll be greatly appreciated as well. We're committed to doing a positive, skeptical conference with a pro-social justice spin featuring a diversity of speakers from various backgrounds, a few controversial topics between social justice and skepticism, and a harassment-free environment. You can support the upcoming Shift to Reason conference at gofundme.com/shift-to-reason-conference-2018. That's Shift to Reason Conference 2018. You can check out the show notes at thebrainstormpodcast.com and our website, brainstormblog.net. I want to give a big thanks to Leslea for joining me. You can find out more about her film on Facebook at facebook.com/losingourreligionmovie. For some reason, I couldn't find the website, so I'll have to get in touch with her and get a link, and then I'll put that in the show notes. For now, the Facebook page link will be in the show notes on thebrainstormpodcast.com. Thanks to our financial supporters, Aaron, Daryl, Destin Sucks, aka Alden, Lachlan, Lisa, Magnus, Michael, Nathan, Positively Skeptical, Rob, Stephanie, and Will. If you want to join their ranks and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. You can join us live every second week when we broadcast live on Spreaker. You can find us at Spreaker.com/user/Brainstorm Podcast. Our next guest is Jonathan Ariola of TDTF Pod, and that's broadcasting on October 13th at 8:30 p.m. Saskatchewan time. Thanks to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for the intro and some of our ads, which didn't play this episode but will play in other episodes. And thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff over at aloststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. Everywhere you spread it, the better it is. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel. Any guests or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Corey, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.
We just wanted to say thanks to everyone who listens to us, shares the show, gives us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or supports us through Patreon and Gumroad. We don't have a lot of interactions with our listeners, but what we have had proves that we attract some of the best people around. Smart, kind, and cool. An audience truly worthy of the titles hardcore and woo-free. Thanks for helping us make the world a smarter place.
Okay, I don't know what the hell I did wrong. I finally found the website and made it work for the Losing Our Religion movie. It's www.losingourreligion.ca, and their Twitter is LOR Movie, at LOR Movie. I found it. There it is. Thanks for listening.